Office of Climate, Weather, and Water Services, known as AQUIS. Chris has been very instrumental in developing the new roadmap that the National Weather Service is going to take through their reorganization and restructuring to be able to provide much more improved services and products to all of us around the country and to decision makers around the nation as well. So before we bring Chris on, I'd like you to take a look at this next video, which the new director of the Weather Service, Dr. Louis Uccellini, sat down with the TV station in Wisconsin. Let's take a look at that.
Our chief meteorologist, Gary Canalti, is on the UW campus tonight for a town hall meeting on building a weather-ready nation. It's hosted by the director of the National Weather Service, Dr. Louis Uccellini. And Gary sat down with him this morning and asked the director what this is all about.
The idea is to take the forecast to the next level where decision makers, whether they be federal agencies, state agency, local agency, individuals, make decisions, make the right decisions based on the forecast and warnings.
Gary hosted a similar town hall meeting in October as part of the National Weather Association conference. That was geared more toward how businesses and emergency managers use weather forecasts. Tonight's meeting is designed to include the general public.
If the public, if individuals do not make the right decisions based on the information they have, we don't have the outcome that everybody expects. We're seeing this in severe weather situations. We make great forecasts. We provide warnings with increased lead time, and people still get caught unaware.
Disasters like the Joplin tornado and Superstorm Sandy point out the challenges in going beyond just putting out warnings.
We even have to take it beyond that. We have to ensure that people understand the risks of these events. And if they have a better understanding, they can make better decisions in terms of what they'll do with that information.
And Gary's entire interview with Dr. Uccellini is being posted on Channel 3000. He got his bachelor, master's, and PhD right here.
I know, isn't that something? That's really something to be proud of.
The head of the National Weather Service.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Chris Strager, and thanks for the introduction earlier, Dave. And it's a pleasure to be here to be the second speaker today at the conference. I'm excited to come back from last year and show you what we've accomplished over the past year. It's kind of a long topic for the title of the presentation: Modernization, Structure, National Weather Service, and Positioning the Agency for Improved Services to Decision Makers, Immediate, and the Public. But what I'm hoping to do is cover all of that in this presentation. I want to take a little bit of a step backwards first, show where we were and where we're going, and then show what 2014 is going to bring for us and hopefully beyond. Excuse me, I have a wardrobe malfunction here. I need to correct this. Is this a little bit better? All right. Let's start on out, the case for change. Let's go back a little bit. When we look at an average year in the United States, there's a lot of things that we see. Unfortunately, one death in the United States from weather is too many, but on the average, 650 deaths, $15 billion in losses every year, 26,000 severe thunderstorms, 6 Atlantic Basin hurricanes, 1,300 tornadoes, and 5,000 floods. With the group that we have here in the audience today and the people I'm sure listening, we can go on quite a discussion here as to what is the cause of this. Or is it getting worse? Is it more extreme than it was? Is climate changing? Or are we warming? Or are we cooling? But what I like to do now, I'm showing from Munich Reinsurance the chart you can see on the bottom left here. And what this is showing are the impacts actually on the number of natural catastrophes on the population up through the year 2012. Regardless of whether there were 14 $1 billion damage events in a year or not, what this chart is showing us is the impacts of those events. This is showing us that the number of times for these events, the communities had to reach outside of their local communities to get support. And you can see the trend since 1980 on the left side of the chart is steadily going up. And I think that's the point of what I'm trying to say this morning, is that regardless of what climatic factors are in play here, more people than ever are being affected by weather in the country. That is a main push behind why we want to do Weather Ready Nation. Now, the case for change here, You can see the pictures from the disasters that we've had over the last several years. But the one thing that really stands out to me is the world population chart. And back in when I was born, 1960, there were 3 billion people on the planet. It's going up a little bit since then, up to about, Ned, you were right, 7 billion is actually the number. I lost count there somewhere along the way. But 7 billion people in the world today. There's a lot more of us building in places where we've never built before. The rural-urban interface for fires, building along the coast, so close to the coast they want to touch the water. Well, unfortunately, in some cases, that's happening. Building out in the Midwest, in little towns that used to see tornadoes before, you never heard much of an impact. Now with the increased population, we're seeing more and more people in those locations. And what we're seeing then is that societal vulnerability. And I mentioned before, it was in 2011, we had 14 $1 billion weather events in the country. In 2012, I believe the number was 11 $1 billion events. I don't know what the count has been now for 2013. I did hear some news reports. They said that in 2013, it actually seemed that the number of extreme events was decreasing. But I'd like you to go out and tell the people in Boulder up in the mountains in September after the flash flooding that there's no more extreme events, that things are quieting down. So we're going to see these events as long as we continue to grow in population, as long as we keep building in places across the United States we've never been before. Now, the case for change, going back to these extreme events, I'd like to think that the events were well forecast, and I thank everybody in this room for your help in getting the word out to everybody. You guys are really relaying the message out there. For Sandy, the left turn forecast path. Back in 2011, I was in Grand Forks, North Dakota for a period of time. The spring flood risk is always a threat up there in the upper Midwest of the country. The outlook went out months in advance for the 2011 historical flooding. We have Dr. Russ Schneider from the Storm Prediction Center. Russ, I don't want to steal your thunder, no pun intended, so I'm not going to go too much into the Moore and Newcastle tornadoes, but I do want to mention that was a significant event in 2013. They were well forecast, but what were the societal events? We want to go back now and see, we got the warnings out, but how did society react to all of this? Let's go back to 2011, the big Southeast United States tornado outbreak, April 27, 28. On the far left, you see the 4 to 8 day outlook, highlighting there's a threat out there. As we get closer to the event in the panels, a 3-day outlook, 2-day outlook, the watch boxes go out, the warnings go out, and then in the aftermath, how well the tornadoes were depicted in the advance notice. Coordination calls with the emergency managers at least day 3, if not earlier than that. 96% of those tornadoes ended up within the watch boxes. 24 minutes on average for lead time was actually a great job. And I know everybody out here got the word out to the media, to the public. But still, at the end of the day, we lost 311 people in that event. And why in this day and age did we lose 311 people? These are some of the things that we want to take a look at with Weather Ready Nation. These are some of the things that the National Weather Service wants to take a look at as we go forward. And Dr. Uccellini had mentioned this earlier in his little video presentation. What I wanted to do, and we sat around a few months ago, I've been at the Weather Service headquarters now a little over 3 years. And it seems to me that things are a blur. Life is a blur anymore. One event just seems to meld into the other as you go from catastrophe to catastrophe. What I wanted to do is put some of these events on the screen and show you on the top half of the chart here on this little timeline starting in 2010 are the natural disasters that we've had in the country. And then on the bottom is the National Weather Service and NOAA's response and the government's response to these events in helping move us towards a weather-ready nation. Up at the top, I decided to start, for those of you in the Mid-Atlantic area, the Snowmageddon. I know out here in Breckenridge in Colorado, it's not such a big deal, but you drop 20 inches of snow in the Mid-Atlantic, you got their attention, I can guarantee it. The Deepwater Horizon was a significant event. You may argue, well, Chris, that's not a natural event. That was more of a man-made disaster. But the ecological disaster that it caused and the aftermath of it, for us in the National Weather Service and the people that supported it, this was really one of our first extended periods of time of doing that decision support on site with the people down along the Gulf Coast states. We had people from offices deployed down there, and some lessons were really learned. A lot of lessons were reinforced in terms of working with the customer and communicating with them. You can see as we go across the top part of the chart, the Midwest blizzard, The Fukushima and the tsunami, the earthquake and the tsunami, had an event or an impact on us in the National Weather Service. Moving across through Irene, the new word in our vocabulary, the Mid-Atlantic derecho. We'll go into that a little bit later. Isaac, Sandy, the New England blizzard 1 year ago in the first week of February, paralyzed parts of New England. I've really never seen snow that hard before. We had reports, they were coming through us through Twitter feeds, of anywhere between 4 and 5 inches an hour as one of the snow bands came up across Long Island.
Some of you might refer to that as
yeah.
emo, but I don't know.
That was a great movie. We liked that. My kids loved it. The Midwest tornado outbreak from this year, and then we didn't have the nerve to put it on here, but the attack of the polar vortex that came down in January of this year. So these are all things that are blending together as you go through this timeline. And then in the bottom, it's not quite, I know for the meteorologists in the crowd here and listening online, it's not quite as exciting, but some of the other things that came out of it, the NOAA strategic plan, the Weather Service strategic plan for building a weather-ready nation, the pilot projects that we started in the National Weather Service, which I'll touch on in a bit, the Weather-Ready Nation Roadmap version 1.0, where that was what I was brought into the headquarters to work on, was to develop a roadmap for the Weather Service for the future. How are the operations going to evolve in the Weather Service, not just over the next 1 or 2 years, where are we going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now? That's what the roadmap was supposed to be showing. The sequestration I put in there, you might say, well, what was that all about? That's not exactly a document you put in there, but that was an event that helped shape us. It affected us quite a bit. The final version, the latest version of the roadmap, version 2.0, that was signed by Dr. Uccellini and others in the Weather Service in April of this year. And something I want to talk about now on the next slide, but I want to touch on it, the Napa study. And in the meantime, we had the Sandy Service Assessment, Sandy Supplemental Funds, and I have a slide on that, and something that I'll end the presentation on, Weather Ready Nation Ambassadors. Now, you're probably wondering, Chris, why did you go out to the National Automobile Parts Association for a study that is not this NAPA? This NAPA that I'm speaking about is the National Academy of Public Administration. This was a congressionally mandated study, and I was actually very happy to see this being done. When you're working for myself, I came from the field. Most of my background has been in field and operations and forecasting. And my foray into headquarters world was doing the roadmap and putting this all together. You kind of want a vector check. Are we on the right path? What do others think of this? So the NAPA report was to come in and take a look at Weather Ready Nation. How are we doing? Where is the Weather Service going? Are we going down the right path with all of this? And I breathed a huge sigh of relief last year when the report did come out. I was wondering how they would take to Weather Ready Nation. We did a word search in a document, and 100 times in the document and mentioned Weather Ready Nation, and that could be a good or a bad thing, but it was a good thing. They felt that we were on the right track, that this is where the agency needs to go. Decision support services were mentioned. The roadmap was mentioned, I think, 17 times in the count, but there's also something that was mentioned 14 times. Inconsistencies were brought up. These are one of the things that I'm going to touch on in just a little bit here. But some of the strategic things that came out of the NAPA report was the pace of change. Back about 20-some years ago, the National Weather Service did the first modernization. Doppler radars came in. The office structure was redefined. It was a big bang theory for the entire National Weather Service. And after the review, they said, you know, that was a great thing you people did. That made a world of difference, but don't ever do that again, because it was too much change too soon. What they advise us is the pace of change has to be put out more in a stair-step manner. Make some changes, evaluate, see what the impacts are on people around you, and then continue with the change down the road instead of one big change over a couple of years. So that was the one thing that was really driven home. And this is something that came out that wasn't back in the early 90s to this extent. And it was the partnerships that we have with everybody in the audience, the entire American weather enterprise in the weather industry. They said, Weather Service, you don't even try to do this alone. You need to bring the partnership in. This has to be a big team effort. And I know for myself, my time in weather goes back to about 1978 when I was an enlisted weather observer in the Air Force. And when I first started in weather, it was different. Everybody had their own silo of excellence. The military did their thing, the Weather Service did their thing, the broadcasters did their thing. It's all changing now. And when I look around now, if somebody says, Chris, what are you most proud from your career to see, or what has been a highlight to see, as the years have gone by, it's this working together now. The weather industry has just grown leaps and bounds. When I was a little kid in the 60s watching Jennifer, we were talking about Joe DiNardo back in Pittsburgh. You can search, you can download weather from anywhere. I can get climate for anywhere. I can get an accurate picture of what's going on across the world. I never thought you'd ever see that before. Now we have it. And as I see what's going on now with 7 billion people across the world, they're needing this information more than ever. But I think that goes to the point that we can't, nor should we try to do it alone. And that goes to the secondary value chain, private-public partnership, and then IT development, centralized change management. The tactical side about it, and there's that word consistency again across the National Weather Service for decision support services. And that goes into the forecast too. I have a few slides that I'll talk about that more. The open weather and climate support. We want to make the information that we have and all of the data that we have available to everybody out there. We know there's a lot of people want to get use out of probabilistic information. There's a lot of risk management models being developed out there that can use this information. We want to make sure that it's out there. And then finally, simplify and sustain the infrastructure, enhance R2O, O2R. We want to also hit the training. One of the things that unfortunately suffers when you're going through some difficult times, I think the first thing is the training, and that's unacceptable. Dr. Uccellini has stated such. The NAPA report stated this as well, and so we want to get back in with the training, working for the folks in the field to get them the latest and greatest training. Now, when you go through a big change of any magnitude, I guess I'm a firm believer of the change starts at the top. You have to lead by example. And that's one of the things that we've tried to do now. And one of the things is the budget restructure for the agency. We used to have PPAs for the project activities. We used to have 17, we currently have 17 buckets, if you would, for money that came in, and one bucket shall not touch the other bucket. You can't mix it in between. Everything is in kind of a silo, as I said before. What Dr. Uccellini wants to do now is simplify the process and narrow it down to 5 PPAs, 5 buckets of money. And this kind of simplifies the whole process down into what we think are the basics, the observations. Anything that is observed on the Earth's surface, observations would go into that bucket and be controlled through that area. The central processing, all the models, all the supercomputing would come in central processing. Probably the biggest bucket, if you would, in there would be the analyze, forecast, and support. All of the forecast offices, 122 of them across the agency, the river forecast centers, the center weather service units for aviation, all of the national centers for environmental prediction would come under this bucket, which would comprise about 45% of the total budget for the National Weather Service. Then something that you'd probably all be interested in, the dissemination. How do we get this information out to you? Anything that has to do with dissemination would go in there. And then last but certainly not least, the science and technology integration. And anything that has to do with the science programs in the agency would go into this bucket. The difficult thing on this then is the horizontal working across the different PPA bins. That's always been a challenge. That will always continue to be a challenge. But I like the path we're going down. This is one of the changes that Dr. Uccellini is putting in this year. We're hoping to get this through and start implementing in FY15. Now, some of the other things that have come up, I just wanted to touch on this real quick. The Weather Ready Nation Vital Conversations. These are driven by the Southeast U.S. Tornado outbreaks in April of 2011. One of the discussions took place in Norman, Oklahoma in December 2011. And I want to focus on that last mile part, the delivery of the warnings. I'm going to touch on that a little bit coming on. And then they met again in April in Birmingham talking about what can we do, physical and social scientists, how do you get a research plan put together? Those are 2 big conversations that took place, and we do have some impacts of that I'll be showing a little bit later in the presentation. But I want to come down to this Weather Ready Nation because I've been asked this question before. He said, well Chris, what is Weather Ready Nation? And Dave and I had a good discussion yesterday evening about this. You know, what is it? What does it mean to different people? And all I would say the Weather Ready Nation means it's everybody doing whatever they can to help decrease the vulnerability of the population to any weather event. As I showed earlier in the presentation with the reinsurance chart, there is an increasing vulnerability. So, God bless you. So anything that we could do that would help people, make them become less vulnerable. Is it putting the warnings out in a different manner? Is it providing the media with different information, a different form of information that you can use to get out to your viewers? Whatever it takes to make us a weather-ready nation and help decrease that vulnerability is what we're going to do. And again, I've got to say it, we can't do it without the support from the people in the audience and everybody listening online. So that, in a nutshell, is what weather-ready nation is. For us in the Weather Service, we see it as 5 major focus areas. We have the internal parts. I want to talk about this in a slide coming up. The impact-based decision support services. The communication and the outreach is such a critical part of this entire process. The science and technology advances, and how do we get the information out to the people? And the external to NOAA part, the innovative partnerships. We are looking, and we've had some successes this past year that I'm going to share with you about how we're partnering with other agencies to get the word across about Weather Ready Nation, how people can take steps to prepare themselves. Okay, impact-based decision support services. We need to understand societal impacts. I think too often in the past, a group of meteorologists get together, they come up with this great product, they throw it over the transom, and they give it to the users, and the users are a little confused, and we go to people and say, well, what do you think of it? Well, you probably could have done this differently, and then we have to go back and re-engineer it after it's already been put out. We want to work with social scientists as we develop this information. Before we put it out, I have a photo I'm going to show you a little bit farther down in the presentation of one way we're doing that. Making the information more relevant to our decision makers. We learned that down in the Deepwater Horizon. How do we speak the language? When we go out to an emergency operations center to fit in, we don't want to just have our laptop computer go in and set up shop and say, okay, well, now what do I do? We want to know what our customer is doing. We want to know what they're concerned with and fit in. In my days in the Air Force, we would do this too, not to tell war stories, but when we would, before we would deploy, we know who the customer was, we knew what platforms they were flying, we knew if there were weapon systems, what weapon systems they were using. We knew all the weather sensitivities of that equipment so that we went on, we could tell the commander, we're not telling them partly sunny and 72 degrees tomorrow, we're telling them how high are the clouds, what's the thickness of the clouds, what's the visibility in the clouds, how is this going to impact the platforms that you want to use. We want to do the same thing for our government partners at the Emergency Operations Center. We want to understand what their concerns are so we can fold in from the beginning before the event even happens. We want to participate directly as we're able to in the decision making for those decisions. I went to, it was late last year, I went to a business roundtable meeting. It was about 100, 150 people, business people from across the D.C. area. And the discussion was on Sandy. And I gave a presentation on Sandy, just an overview, some of the things that we did. Talked about the decision support that we did and gave a few facts and figures. And they opened it up at the end, and they had a podium in amongst the people for people to go and a speaker for them to ask questions. And so they opened it up for questions. I'm standing up there vulnerable at the podium, and some gentleman comes up, and he looks up, and he starts pointing his finger at me. And that's never a good sign when you're at the podium to take a question and the speaker, the person is pointing a finger at you. He said, National Weather Service, he said, I just want to tell you something. And I, oh, here we go. And he said, I can't tell you how valuable the on-site decision support was in Nassau County, New York on Long Island during Sandy. He said, there was a young lady that was there at the Emergency Operations Center with us. We could have never made the decisions we did in a timely manner if she wouldn't have been by our side helping us through this difficult event. And it really hit home to me that this is working. It's not perfect yet. We can't be in every single emergency operations center. That's why we're out working with you today to talk about this. But there is a need out there today, again, with more people and more places that they've never been before. This is what we're trying to do then for the protection of life and property. And then counting on the market forces to help us deliver this type of information. Some of the successes that we've had, impact-based warning demonstration. What this is, the Central Region of the National Weather Service a few years ago, again, this is in response to the April 2011 tornado, said, hey, sometime, you know when there's going to be a killer tornado. You know when the atmosphere is able to support it. You know from ground truth when an EF4 or an EF5 is on the ground tearing up some small city. Is there a special part or an addition to the warning that we could add that would give people some extra heads up that this isn't, I hate to use the word an ordinary tornado, but an EF0 or an EF1, this is a killer tornado coming through. So the past two tornado seasons, severe weather seasons, we've been experimenting with this from the central region. It's been interesting. We've had good responses to it. We've had mixed responses from it. From the meteorological community, there's been calls say, well, that's impossible. You can't forecast a tornado strength for the day. I think you know what the atmosphere is capable of, but this isn't meant to do this. This is meant to, once you see that tornado forming, once you see the environment, once you hear the reports that a tornado is on the ground and moving towards other communities, that's when this is meant to take place. We're going to continue it for the 2014 severe weather season, and we're hoping to spread it across a few other regions in the United States. The National Scout Jamboree, I put this on there, and at the written request of the West Virginia State Emergency Manager, we went ahead and provided some on-site decision support for the Boy Scouts out there. The National Jamboree brought together 50,000 Boy Scouts in one location in the mountains of wild, wonderful West Virginia at the end of July. And for meteorologists looking at this, you see the flash flood potential, severe thunderstorm potential, and you get a little nervous because that would make, every day when the Jamboree was going on for 2 weeks, the influx of adults and other volunteers that put the population at 200,000 people, which made it every day the largest city in West Virginia. With very few hardened facilities to go into and a very vulnerable population out there doing all kinds of sporting activities outdoors, it was a challenge. We had a success on that one. Midway through the Jamboree on the weekend, they had a Saturday where they had a big concert evening planned, fireworks and awards and everything. We saw a few days before, it looked like a weak front was going to drop down. We urged them, if they could, to move up the ceremonies to maybe mid to late afternoon. They moved it to about 3 o'clock. They got about 90% of the ceremony in when we saw some thunderstorms forming on an outflow boundary. We got word to them. They evacuated the boys. Everybody was safe and sound. They estimate they had 40-knot-plus winds at sight, cloud-to-ground lightning, torrential rain. So we felt like that was a success, but this is the type of support that people are looking for out there and for the emergency managers across our areas. The pilot projects continue now with 4 of our forecast offices, 2 operations centers. Previous to 2 years ago, we didn't have a central facility within the National Weather Service headquarters that was tracking these types of activities. That was one of the pilots, been very successful, and the centers across the country that are doing these pilot projects, we've learned a lot with emergency response specialists, and that's not a new job series for us. What it means is these are the meteorologists and the hydrologists across the agency that are receiving the training now in how to support emergency management. And it's all about building relationships. Finally, the Oklahoma tornado events, and again, Russ, I'll let you cover this in more detail from May. We found that the partner outreach with the Moore people in the city, especially in the Moore Medical Center, where 300 people sought refuge during the height of the storms, really made the difference. And that's what we want to continue to push in terms of decision support services. Now, these emergency response specialists, we're putting together a training plan now that we want to work with all of the meteorologists and hydrologists to give them this specialized training. Again, it's still going to be meteorology and hydrology. It's going to be their basic knowledge base, but we want to build upon this. So how do you respond? How do you work with your emergency managers? How do you get the point across clearly and succinctly to people that don't have a lot of time for wanting to know what the 500 millibar pattern is? They want to know the impacts. They want to know how it's going to affect their operation. We've had a lot of deployments we've learned from over the past 2 years. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from people. But the difficult thing is Dr. Uccellini comes up and says, well, Chris, give me some quantitative numbers. Tell me how this is making a difference. And we get a lot of pats on the back. We got a lot of letters of commendation after the event. But how do you translate into metrics that you can show, yes, we're improving decision support services, or we're staying the same? What we're doing now is working directly with FEMA. FEMA had the same issue. How do you quantify the services that you provide for decision support and in emergencies, in emergency responses? So we're working directly with FEMA to adapt their system over to us. And there's, I think, about 20 measures that FEMA is using right now that we're going to adopt over to providing decision support services from a meteorological and hydrologic standpoint. That's coming this year, and I'm going to be anxious to see how that works. And again, the National ERS, Emergency Response Specialist Training Plan, is being developed now down at the Weather Service Training Center, and that goes into the training aspect of the entire Weather Ready Nation effort. So building the relationships, it shocked me this past year especially, as we went out to some of the other government agencies, and the big government agencies that are out there, to ask them about Weather Ready Nation and what needs that they have, and they didn't even know that we could provide this type of support, that we had this type of information. So I think of anything this past year, just working within the government, the federal government system, we were finding a lot of ways to provide support to these agencies. They were hunting and pecking through the internet trying to find some source of information and then put that up to the decision makers. So we're working with them now to try and get a more formal system in place to provide that information. Participating in the meetings before things happen. And the FEMA administrator, Craig Fugate, says that the time to hand out business cards is not after the disaster started. And that's the approach we're trying to take. Working with emergency managers, doing these exercises before the disaster hits so that they know who's going to be providing that emergency support to them. And what our goal is we want to make this type of an interaction part of standard operating procedures of what we do with these core partners. Now, the roadmap implementation. Remember I said this past April, the roadmap was signed off by Dr. Uccellini and others in the National Weather Service. What we want to do now is take the pilot projects that we have, take the lessons that we've learned about decision support, and we want to put those across the National Weather Service as we define the Weather Forecast Office of the future. We want to also work on an impacts catalog development. As you know, we have a national digital forecast database that goes out to 7 days with all the forecast parameters in it. What we want to do now, and we're already experimenting with this in a few of our regions now, is we go to our customers, say that we have a state emergency operations center. They say we have a bridge, big bridge, tall bridge, that we can't let traffic on, or we have to restrict traffic at 40 knots. For us, that's not a warning criteria, but it's in the forecast. If we know these from our government partners, and we can put this into an impacts catalog that interacts with our National Digital Forecast database, it can flag us in advance to when we think these criteria could be reached. It won't be a warning criteria, but our partners will be able to know what's going in. We want everybody to be able to get into this catalog and to be able to put parameters in so that you all can see if you have specific parameters that you think your customers need advice for, it plugs right into the National Digital Forecast database, and you would receive some kind of a flag or a local text or an email or however you wanted to see that information. We talked about the training plan, and consistency is the key there. We want to ensure that when our people go out to support the customers, that they are consistently providing this type of information. We don't want any cowboys out there going out and making their own forecasts. Well, this is what the forecast says, but this is what I really think is going to happen. We don't want that to happen. Everything has got to be consistent from one single database. And I'd just like to take a few minutes now to go through the consistency part of what I mentioned previously, and how we're going to take some steps to help ensure that consistency in the forecast. The one thing I did about 3 or 4 years ago when I was director of the Eastern Region of the Weather Service, they'd been working on this for a few years before I arrived there, is enhanced short-term forecast. All that means is refreshing that digital database when it comes out. The NDFD was kind of a new thing for forecasters 10 years ago, keeping this caught up. As we have more and more information coming in now from the models, the struggle is there for the forecaster to keep this database up to date, especially in the short term, that most critical part of the forecast that's affecting the customers right now. So every 3 hours at a minimum, the forecasters have to go in, freshen everything up, make sure everything is matching, and that we're good for the next day or so in the short term. Doesn't sound like much. This brings a consistency to the product and a continuancy of the updating. How are we going to keep this product updated? The aviation forecast part of it, the FAA told me a few years ago, they said they want 3 things from the National Weather Service in terms of our forecast. Consistency, consistency, consistency. They want the forecasts, the terminal aerodrome forecasts, the TAFs. They want the TAFs to match the public forecasts. They want that to match what comes out of the Aviation Weather Center. There's several specialized aviation forecast products that we produce. We want to make sure they're all in lockstep so one isn't contradicting the other. It's kind of difficult. You have different time scales, different parameters you're forecasting for, but that has to be consistent. Right now, what we're experimenting with at a few weather forecast offices is having the terminal aerodrome forecasts drop out of this gridded system that's updated every few hours. And it's not perfect, but it provides a forecaster then with that link to what your public-facing forecast is showing and what your aviation forecast is doing. It'll give you a draft to start with, you work it from there, and then you issue the product. And we've gotten some really good feedback from the customers with these updated and consistent TAF forecasts and aviation forecasts. That's going to continue on over the next few years. The one thing now Dr. Uccellini says is we have 122 weather forecast offices producing 122 forecasts across the country. How do you ensure boundary consistency? How do you ensure that temporal consistency, timing fronts across multiple office areas? One thing that we're looking at now is we're calling it a blender approach. We want to take a look at this. We're starting with days 4 through 8. We want to take a look at the ensembles that are coming out, all the model information that's available. We want to look at the verification for the past few days of those models. What's the past history been? If there's another attack of the polar vortex coming down, which model had it handled the best? We want to go in that direction so that there's a basis, a consistent basis for selecting the model of the day. And using this blender approach, give at least the forecasters a starting point that's consistent to go out in their forecasts with. We also want to look at getting the forecast in our National Digital Forecast Database out to 10 days. I think the time is ready. I know there's going to be some people that will push back, just like there were people that pushed back when we went to 5 days, when we went to 7 days, and they'll say, it's not there, you can't do 10 days yet. You have to start. You have to start somewhere. You have to do these things. And I think the time now is to start. The question, and Dale, you and I had a discussion yesterday on this, is what do you make it a deterministic forecast, a partly sunny high 72 forecast? Do you make it more probabilistic? Is this a time that we go out there, that we start introducing the public to more of a probabilistic approach to forecasting? Is it a combination of both of these things? I don't have the answer yet. We're studying that now, and we want to do that. I'd like to see that come out over the next year, that we start experimenting going out to 10 days with this. And, of course, we're going to have to look at verification statistics, how well it's doing. We're not just going to throw something out the front door and hope it sticks. But I think the time is now to explore going towards it. With as complicated as the society is these days, and as many actions need to be taken, especially in the large metropolitan areas, I think any advance notice we can give to the customers, even if we attach that caveat of uncertainty to it, I think now's the time where they'd really like to see that. Outreach to the public. This has been something that we've really been working on with this. We have a Weather Ready Nation webpage, the campaigns that you can see listed there, the Turnaround, Don't Drown. I used to think that was a little hokey. But then I have kids coming up to me and reciting these back to me. And now I get it. It's sticking out there. People are learning. The next generation is learning. Don't drive through that water at night. You need to turn around. Don't go through it. When thunder roars, go indoors. They're learning that for their own safety. One public-private or government partnership that we had was with the government agency, actually. It's the National Environmental Education Foundation, NEEF. And the people at the forecast offices and river forecast centers, outreach is a big thing of what we do. Sometimes we're limited, though, in how many people that we could reach. And we went with NEEF on this about this time last year, started the partnership with them. And they said, hey, we have some production capability. We have 10-second public service announcements at the Brickyard 400 in Indianapolis at the end of July. Would you be interested in a 10-second one for Weather Ready? We said, sure, we'll give it a try. And the 10-second thing, you could see it up there in the top center of the screen, Are You Weather Ready? It wasn't advertising for National Weather Service. As a matter of fact, NOAA.gov, visitweather.gov, but Are You Weather Ready? and they had an over voice come on to the Jumbotron that played once an hour. Are you weather ready? Be prepared for severe weather. And it played to 1.2 million people that were in attendance over the 3 days of that event. It would take us a lifetime of going out and doing outreach to be able to just get a message of preparedness out to people. And working with our partners in the media, we know that you all are working with us too, but that was a great opportunity for us to be able to reach people in that venue. We're hoping to be able to do things like that in the future. And what I think was important was a follow-on. NEAF had a YouTube site set up where people could go on, and they said that the weather-ready section of their YouTube hits were the highest hits that they had. So there's a lot of interest in there in this on becoming weather-ready. FEMA working with them on National Preparedness Month and a Prepare-a-thon. And this kind of goes to what I said before, the Young Meteorologist Program. We're partnering with a private agency, Planet Now organization, and their goal is to get to children out there, to get the message of preparedness out to them. Our generation, sometimes they don't perceive the message as well as we would like them to. They're not as prone to change. But as I mentioned before, growing up in a society now with weather, how many days can you turn on the national news now in the country where there isn't at least a minor mention of weather that's affecting the country in some way, shape, or form? This generation wants to know more about it. We see it when we go out to the schools. We get it in the questions we see. The Young Meteorologist Program is a computer-based game the kids can log on to. Elementary school teachers are using this now to help get kids in with weather preparedness. What do you do when a tornado approaches? What do you do in a flash flood? And they're having a lot of success with that. And also the Ollie Skywarn in the middle of the screen there. And I used to think, well, is that really effective? Is that really something that we need? But it's amazing. We have these events. The kids flock to it. They want to hear more about it. While they're there, we're able to talk to them about weather education and preparedness. It's all coming together in terms of the outreach to the public. In terms of science and technology advances, just a few things that I want to touch on here, especially the model upgrades. Let's just go to this next thing. I'm see if this is going to work. No, it's not going to work. Okay.
Click on it with the mouse.
Yeah, it's not. Let me see. Yeah, it's not working. That's okay. What I wanted to show here, and I wanted to get the point across, you can still see the point. The high-resolution rapid refresh model for the first word, before there was polar vortex, there was derecho for the people in the Mid-Atlantic states. And I can guarantee you that on 28 June, nobody knew what a derecho was in the Mid-Atlantic, or a few people, but on June 30th, it's all people were talking about is the thunderstorms that went through them. And the radar observed portion of it lined up so well with the HRRR 12-hour forecast. And what I want to get, without the advantage of being able to loop this for you, I'm going to get the point across that the HRRR is going to become operational for us this year. Russ, I know some of your forecasters said they relied on the HRRR during the May tornado outbreaks. I was reading their after-action reports. And this is becoming part of what we do. And this goes back in to that National Digital Forecast Database, keeping that updated, keeping the forecast consistent, and how do you integrate things like the HRRR, which is going to be coming at us every hour, into our forecast database, keeping everything fresh, that all the products that fall out of it are consistent, and they're taking all of this great information and incorporating into the forecast. Again, HRRR is going to become operational this year. I'm excited to see how that's going to go into the operations when everybody can use it. Sandy supplemental funding. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but computer upgrades, observations, and models. That was a real great thing for the agency to be able to get this money. I'm pretty excited about what we're doing with it. One of the things that Dr. Uccellini, I know he would want me to show, in the interest of time, I didn't show about the computing upgrades that are going to be available now at our National Centers for Environmental Prediction. But one thing that I did want to show, and I guess they say one picture is worth 1,000 words. Hopefully 2 pictures are going to be worth 2,000 words here. On let me set this up for you. This is from Sandy. The photo on the left of the computer model is from the GFS. This was the model initialization, 0Z on 24 October. What you see on the left was the operational that went out at 27-kilometer resolution. And you heard what was said that, well, the European model did better at 7 days out. And it's true. The GFS operational model had actually a right turn to Sandy, but caught up quickly after that. But what a lot of people didn't get to see, and this is what's going to be implemented this year and in part from the Sandy funds. On the right side of the screen is the experimental version at 13 kilometers that was running. And it picked up, the experimental version of the GFS at 13 kilometers did indeed pick up the left turn for Sandy. It built the ridge in better to the north, it portrayed it better, and that's almost a 180-degree difference in the forecast that comes out. I'm excited as a forecaster, too, that we're going to see this type of accuracy come out in the GFS, and that's going to be available this year. But I just wanted to show you some of what the monies from Sandy are going to be going for. Yes?
Just a quick question. I was just wondering with that previous slide, was there any additional data put into the higher resolution model, or it was just run at a higher resolution?
It's not my understanding that there was any additional. It was just run at the higher resolution. So I think that's an exciting progression for us. The social science part of what we're trying to do, winter hazard simplification. I have a small group of people at the headquarters that are trying to look at this now. When you have a complex situation, if you have dangerous wind chill, if you have freezing rain, if you have snow blowing, you can have several different headlines for forecasts, and it just gets to be a complicated mess. And people don't know what they're supposed to prepare for. They're hunkering down, hiding under their beds, that everything's going to happen to them. How do we simplify that message, yet not lose any of the urgency? We're trying to take a look at that now with some social scientists to see, is there a better way that we can convey this message? Remember, I said part of this isn't just getting accuracy. 20 years ago, as I was coming up through the forecast ranks, I would have been thrilled, and I would have thought that maybe adding 1 or 2 minutes onto the tornado warning lead time was it. That's what we do. Man, we did our job all as well. But it goes so far beyond that now. How do we relay this to people in a way that makes sense to them? And we're trying to look at a few different ways to do that. In the top center part of your screen from Hurricane X, you can see up in the corner, this is something, Dr. Rick Knabb is going to be with us tomorrow from the Hurricane Center. And this is storm surge mapping. This was a big thing, and this is also being helped up by Sandy supplemental funds. Remember I said before, is we'd go out as a bunch of meteorologists, hey, we could take care of this. We'll just put some colors in, we'll be good to go. We're not doing that this time. This storm surge map is being worked on side by side with social scientists. What are the break points for people in wanting to know what the height is? What are the colors to get them to take action? How do you best get this down to the street level to show people? So storm surge of 5 feet, what does that mean? I want to see it on the map. I want to see how that's going to affect my neighborhood. This is what we're working on. It's going to come out over the next few years. I'm excited about that, and Dr. Knabb will have more information on that tomorrow as he talks. The one thing in the top right part, remember I said we had the Birmingham discussion, the critical discussion with scientists. This is what the National Severe Storms Laboratory is working on, forecasting a continuum of environmental threats, facets. And I'm going to try, Russ, I'll butcher this, just go ahead and correct it later. But what I want to get across and what facets means, one of the things, we've been issuing warnings for thunderstorms for the same way for decades and decades and decades. Lance Rossfuse is working this, and he has a pretty powerful graphic, and he shows a text warning of a tornado imminent to strike a community. And he said, there's one thing wrong with this. What does it look like? And had the date up there for 2012. And he flashes back. He said, this is actually a warning from 1972. He said, it has not changed in 40 years. Yet the technology that we have, the modeling and capabilities are getting to be so much more robust. What this is then, imagine that, so Dave, if you're somewhere at a point in space, what are your probabilities at that point of receiving severe weather over the coming hour? And this is a way to portray that in those probabilities that I was speaking of. I don't think for us in this room, for the rest of our careers, that we're ever going to completely be able to get rid of text warnings. But I think this is something very exciting to show to others, to make their own decisions, for you to portray to your viewership different ways. Where is the greatest threat for severe weather or tornadic activity over the coming hour instead of the polygon or the box? I think this is a dynamic way to portray it. We went ahead and actually, I was with Lance, and we were able to brief this to Administrator Fugate over at FEMA. He was excited about this too, and not just because of the people being able to take their own personal actions to prepare themselves for this, from the response side of the house. He said this will allow us to get resources where they're needed to a site quicker to help assist people when we have big tornadic outbreaks. So there's a lot of buzz around this. We're still a little ways out from getting this going. There's a lot of education that has to go out with it, a lot of training for people, but I'm pretty excited about this, that I think this is where warnings are going in a weather-ready nation, maybe 5 years from now, is we'll be at least experimenting with these. The impact-based warnings on the bottom, I know you can't see that. It was just meant to be a memory jogger for me to put it up there. We're going to continue with that to see, working with social scientists, what information to a public will help to differentiate, what helps them to take the actions that we want during severe weather. And then finally, in the bottom right, is trying to work on our web pages, continue to make them to give information to people in an easily accessible manner so they can see what's going on. We actually have, I don't know what you all think about it, but the icons at the bottom. Sometimes people will complain if you have on your forecasts and you want to see the icon for your corresponding forecast. For today, mostly cloudy, 30% chance of snow showers. The icon will show up as snow. And I know my mom's not listening today, but if my mom was on there, she'd be buying toilet paper and lunch meat and bread and hunkering down for the storm if she saw that one icon. So what we want to do is give a better characterization in that single icon to people. What is more likely to happen? It's not going to be a snowstorm with this huge flake taking over the entire screen. It's going to be a chance of snow showers. We're working on that. We have a briefing, I think, in 2 weeks now to Dr. Uccellini on where we're going with that and how we want to implement that. But those are some of the things that we're trying to do right now to push this out. And you know, I got to be honest with y'all. When I took this position, it was a little overwhelming to think, well, what do you start? Where do you start? You want to move the agency forward. Where do you start? It's like that old joke, how do you eat an elephant? And I guess the answer is with a single bite. You got to start somewhere. Maybe these aren't the things that I'm showing that everybody in the audience says, well, yeah, that should be your number one priority. Or no, this should be another higher priority, but you got to start somewhere. And then remember I said that stair-step approach that we're trying to take? This is the first step. And with input from everybody here, and people listening on air, and from people in all facets of government and external users, we want to find out, where do we go next? Where do you want us to go next? Where do people want us to go next to help make this relevant to them? Where do we go next to help support what you're doing to get this critical message out to people? That's where we're trying to move. The information delivery, social media, I don't have to tell you guys out there, tweets, Facebook, everything is really become so powerful in what we do. We watched the February blizzard from our operations center to headquarters. And I was so curious to watch on Twitter. I think they had Hootsuite up. They had several feeds coming in from Long Island areas. The snow bands were coming up. We had the forecast out there. We said, stay off the roads. Don't go anywhere. For goodness sake, just stay home. And we had one tweet that came up. Somebody in Long Island said, I'm going to go out and get a pizza. You know, I think I'm going to go out and give it a try. It doesn't look that bad. And we're in the ops center. And before we could even react to it, the rest of the community said, what, are you stupid? Don't go out. You got to stay home. And people were seeing the policing of the message. As long as we, working with you, can get out that consistent message to people, telling them what to expect, they're taking that message and they're policing it. So if Aunt Edna wants to go out shopping and there's 4 to 5 inches of snow per hour, they're telling Aunt Edna, don't go anywhere. You need to stay home right now. That's fantastic. What more could you ask for is a consistent message to be taken by the people and repeated in a correct format to others. So this is what we're watching now, and for these events, it's fascinating to watch these things develop. Wireless emergency alerts. You know, it's coming through your cell phone now. Yeah, there have been a few hiccups with that. People 100 or 200 miles away getting a warning on their cell phone at 3 o'clock in the morning for an event that isn't even close to them. We get it. We understand. We're working with the carriers, though, and I'll leave you at the end of this presentation, I want to talk a little bit more about wireless emergency alerts. But I also have to say, too, and this is where I've had to develop a thick skin in what I do now, you're going to put these things out there. Some of them are going to work. They're going to be 100% first time out to shoot. Those are the lucky ones, that there's no issues or feedback. There's going to be times when you come back and maybe there's going to be a few things that aren't exactly right. You don't throw it all off to the side or put it out to the curb. You fix what's wrong with it and you press forward. I really believe wireless emergency alerts, WIA, is going to be something that we need to continue to rely on. It's going to warn people in these locations. It's already saved lives, and it's going to continue to save lives. We have to fix it, though. There's a few things that need to be corrected. We'll keep working on it with our carriers, and we keep pushing forward on this. And let's see now. Strengthening the partnerships on this. And I can't make the plea any more than I am right now. We need everybody here, everybody in this room. We need everybody listening online to work with us to make this a weather-ready nation. It's never going to happen by ourselves. One group isn't going to do it by themselves. So I look forward to working with you all on this. And one way to strengthen the partnerships, another thing that I've learned, like I said, most of my career has been in operations, so this has kind of been a revelation to me over the last several years. Did you guys know it's sometimes very difficult to get something pushed through the government? There's a lot of red tape that you got to untangle, a lot of things that you have to take care of. No, that's just a rumor. The Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Initiative is our way to want to reach out to all of you. This was an idea that we had. We have, if you guys heard of the storm-ready communities, the tsunami-ready communities, those are things where we go to communities and we want to make sure that they have their 24/7 points of contact. They have redundant backups for everything. This is more about getting that emergency management in a community ready for a storm, storm ready. The Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Initiative is different because we realize we cannot, nor should we be doing this by ourselves. We want to ask you to help us. We want you to become a Weather Ready Nation ambassador. All this means is going out to you. If you could put, we're going to send you, if you want to become a Weather Ready Nation ambassador, we'll send you a toolkit. Your local office will work with you to get a message out. If you could put it on the air to your viewers. Hey, just awareness today this is a Severe Weather Awareness Week. Just, be aware of some things. Throw out a few tips to your viewers. You all can reach more people than we can going to the individual sites to talk to them in purpose. We need your help on this. We need your assistance to do this. And all it is going to be going on to a website. Just put your name, your company, and just send it back to us. And we have operators standing by now to go ahead and take your information. We'll find out what's the best way to get back to you. If it's a national organization, we'll probably tackle it from headquarters. If it's a local TV station that wants to be part, we'll hook you up. We know you're already in with the local station there, but we'll make sure that you get a toolkit out to you. We'll make sure that you have the information to go on the air. But it's not just the media. Insurance companies want to do this. Think about it for the insurance companies. They want their people to be aware. They want them to be prepared. So when this weather hits, there's, of course, fewer claims. People are safer. They have quarterly magazines. Maybe they put a Weather Ready Nation thing in their safety tips. That's fantastic. I can never reach that many people, yet they can. This is what an ambassador would do. NEAF is going to become an ambassador with us. That Brickyard 400 example that I gave is perfect. That's a way of reaching out to people to get the message out there. So that's going to be coming out. We're hoping to roll it out at the American Meteorological Society meeting in Atlanta the first week in February. That's coming up real soon. We just got the last I dotted and the last T crossed, so we're able to go out. And it's not a big deal. And you say, well, whoop-de-doo, Chris. It's a logo. We want to give you a logo to be able to use. We don't care where you put it on. But we want to give you a trademark logo that you can use, and we want that to become a symbol of weather-ready knowledge by people that are out there. So that's coming down the pike, and I have one more slide on it, and we call it an all-hands-on-deck approach. It's supposed to be a tool to help get that dialogue going between the parts of the society that we've wanted to reach for so many years, the insurance agencies. We want the big store chains. Maybe they can set up, I don't know, some kind of a flashlight. I don't care if it's a flashlight display. Severe weather season, be prepared. Do you have a flashlight? It could be something as simple as that. And consistent messaging. What we want to do is be able to give you all a consistent message to put out to the people. So working together, I'm pretty excited on the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Initiative. And I'm going to close this morning now, before we open it up for questions. I wanted to put something up there for the Midwest tornado outbreak. And again, Russ, I'm not sure if you're going to mention this, but a couple of things. I have my one prop today that I brought with me. From November 17, 2013, and for those of you watching the Chicago Bears game, I wasn't so much yelling at the screen for the game. I was yelling at the screen for why are there still people sitting in the stands? And the message did get out, and they evacuated people. But I thought it was a pretty well-handled event. Again, going down the spectrum from 4 days all the way down through the occurrence. I thought it was well forecast, well broadcast in advance. People knew what was going to happen. They knew something is up. This is unusual. We need to be ready for it. But I wanted to leave you with something, because sometimes when I lay in bed at night and I wonder, is this working? I left the field. I love forecasting. I love forecasting. And I came to do this stuff, and I wonder, is this really the right thing? Is it making a difference? I had 2 stories that came in from wireless emergency alerts, and this brings in everything that people are doing, from the observations to the forecasts to working in the societal part of it. And this is a story from during that outbreak. This is from Washington, Illinois, from the EF4 tornado. Daniel Bennett was officiating Sunday service before 600 to 700 people when he heard a warning. Then another from the congregation. I'd say probably 24 phones started going off in the service, and everybody started looking down, he said. What they saw was a text message that a tornado was in the area. Bennett stopped the service and ushered everyone to a safe place until the threat passed. And that storm was hit by the tornado. The church was hit by the tornado. That's one example of how this is working. How many other stories are out there that we're just not hearing about? And this is another story from the meteorologist in charge of our St. Louis office. Was out assessing storm damage in Illinois. He met a woman who lived in a mobile home, and she got the WIA message on her cell phone. She and her child abandoned the mobile home and sought shelter in a ditch. The tornado came through and obliterated their mobile home. They survived. And that's another example. Somebody that heard it, they know what to do. They were weather ready. They sought shelter, and it saved their lives. So, yeah, I think it is working. So I look forward to working with all of you in the coming years. We continue to hone this message and make the rest of America weather ready. So thank you very much.
You know, this is Dale Eck from the Weather Channel. Find it interesting when you talked about the one that went through Alabama.
Yes.
And I remember we were there and kind of forecasting it. We had some teams out in the field, and it was, well forecasted event. It happened in the middle of the day. Mm-hmm. And what was so sobering about that event was we came in the next day and realized that if you did not have a basement, you did not have much of a chance. So I think you're right. The system of letting people know this is coming, this day is going to be bad. You got to be prepared, and I actually think most people were. I think the sobering part of that whole event was that F4 and F5 tornadoes, if you do not have a shelter, if you do not have a basement, you can do everything right that they tell you to do. And I think we saw people being interviewed. Yeah, a few that were in the bathroom that did, but a lot of them did the right thing. And it's just very sobering. We can do so much, but ultimately, where weather events occur, where people aren't used to them, then you're going to lose life.
Dale, and that's a good point. If you're in a house, I don't care how well built it is. If an EF5 is coming your way, your day's not going to end well. But I think one of the things that I'm hoping Weather Ready Nation will do, and we've already seen this, is some of the construction codes then for the future, looking ahead, and not just to 1 or 2 years from now, but looking ahead decades. I'm hoping that they take this into account in tornado-prone areas, in hurricane-prone areas, that some of the construction standards will be reviewed. Again, that's not our push. We can provide the information and work with the planners to get the point out that maybe in decades to come that there'll be some standards that maybe an EF5, maybe not, it wouldn't survive, but a lesser tornado that in the past may have obliterated a house would provide some shelter to people in there. Any other questions?
Hi, John Morales from
John.
NBC6 in Miami. Hi, Chris. Obviously, I mean, this is all great going forward, impact-based decisions, support at the local level, Weather Ready Nation and other things. But, in a budget-constrained environment, how is the National Weather Service going to accomplish this? I mean, how does NAPA help you? What guidance did they provide? How did the NRC study weather services for the nation becoming second to none provide some guidance in being able to do this while you can't increase the number of employees? Perhaps you're not staffed for it. Is that a question that needs to be asked? How do you see all this going forward?
I see staffing studies in the future that determine it, what do you need, but that's not from my perspective. My perspective from a weather-ready nation point of view, and what I've been trying to do with this roadmap, is strive for what resources we do have to be able to focus them in a manner, the consistency to get in the forecast in all phases from hour 0 all the way through 10 days of the forecast. You don't need a windfall of money to do that. It's organization, it's planning, and it's execution, and it's getting people together to do this. So from my part, that's what we're doing. The partnerships we're working with you and from others in this room, with NEAF and everybody, those are partnerships that are out there. They want to work with us, and we just have to have a mechanism that can get the word out to people. So that John, in a nutshell, is how I'm doing this. And we work with the budget we have, and we do the absolute best we can.
Okay, so let me follow up. Adjusting, I'm former NOAA, former National Weather Service, right? So I think adjusting the skill set of your current forecasters is something that needs to be addressed if you're going to be providing these impact-based decisions at the local level and supporting all these different outfits, whether it be a football stadium or an event or so on and so forth. So a two-part question. How are you going to address the training aspect of it, A? And B, again, going back to the budget, if programs like Pathways are essentially shut down right now, you can't get any young talent coming in to spend summers, meteorologists that are training and studying to become perhaps future employees, but they can't get their foot in the door because Pathways is shut. How are you going to get there?
Well, and John, and I'll answer the second part first. Dr. Uccellini's looking at this, ways to get the young talent into the agency. They're trying to open that back up again. I'm pretty confident over the next few years we have to open that back up. It's been a rough few years, past years, but I don't see that as being the standard for where we go in the future. The first part of your question, I'm glad you brought that up. Real quick, I was asked to speak one of the leadoff messages at the student conference last year at the American Meteorological Society, and all these young folks were out there, 600 smiling faces at 8:30 on a Saturday morning, which was pretty impressive. And I'll tell you what, if you ever feel that you're in a slump in your career and you want to get a jolt, just go in and address that audience. I was so impressed by the people. But the things that I told them, and that we had sessions, one-on-ones, I think I met with over 400 of them later on, and what we were telling them is the days when I went through college decades ago. It was a very focused education that we received on meteorology. The one thing that I did receive that was brand new the day started that year was at Penn State. I was in the first class for broadcasting. How do you relay information? And it opened my eyes. But I know there's a lot more things now. I have one young man, I wish, I'm going to meet with him in a few weeks down at AMS, but he actually has emergency management background. So he's a meteorologist coming out. He graduates in May with emergency management background. That's what we're telling the people that are coming. First off, you're absolutely right. Get the pipeline open to get these great young people into there. But it's also whenever I have an opportunity to meet with academia that I wanted to say that the traditional days of meteorologists, I think, are gone. And these kids coming, I won't call them kids, these young people coming out today are just so impressive because they've taken the initiative. They see what's going on. And they're going on and expanding into things like emergency management, communications. We take meteorologists, and God love them sometimes, but they try and get a message out, but they can't do it. Well, vorticity lobe coming down on, oh my goodness, no. What are the impacts? How do you relate the message? Learning at an early age in college how to communicate this message properly, having the proper computer skills. We're seeing people want GIS-based information. They want different formats. So how do you deliver that information to people? And it doesn't take, I don't want it to take 6 months to get something out to them. How do you adjust on the fly to give you all what you were looking for and to give emergency managers what they need? So to answer the first part of your question, we are very much aware of it. We're trying to work with the schools for that curriculum, and whenever we have the opportunity to speak to young people, like at the AMS, we take full advantage and tell them to broaden their horizons. And I'm excited because I think in the Weather Service end, we're going to see these broadened things with emergency response specialists. The career field is going to be broadened, and we are going to need people like that. They're going to become valuable like gold. So we're trying to cultivate that in the future.
Chris, Dan Bailey from the International Association of Wildland Fire.
Hey, Dan.
Hi. My question is, briefly in your opening, you talked a little bit about wildland-urban interface fire and that particular issue and some of the challenges that are facing the United States in relationship to that problem. My question is, as you look at Weather Ready Nation and how all of these kind of pieces fit together, what are you looking at in terms of kind of gearing up to deal with wildland fire, wildland-urban interface fire, and some of the same kind of issues with floods and tornadoes and other types of natural disasters?
Well, that's a good question. And we're just finishing up our assessment on the Colorado flash floods that we had. And I'm not a fire specialist. I don't pretend to be one. But talking with other federal agencies, first off, we can't do this in ourselves by a vacuum. Learning what the burn scars were and how it increased the risk for the flash flooding, I think working on that, and I think part of it is the precip forecast and the QPF, being able to hone that down instead of giving a fairly broad swath as we get things like HER coming online with the high-resolution rapid refresh models, trying to pinpoint these areas where we see the greatest threats coming. I think that's how we can help the officials in trying to narrow that response time down. We have folks in the agency that are so passionate about working with fire weather, and that's going to be spreading. I think that's going to be a key skill. Just like John brought up before about what skills do you need in the agency, I see that as something that we need to continue to enhance in the agency, and that certainly isn't going away over the coming years. What I'm hoping to do is use the Colorado example from September as a good springboard for lesson learned on how we can tailor some support in the future.
Hi, Chris. Craig Setzer from CBS
Hey, Craig.
Miami. Good to see you back here again. You mentioned, and it's really encouraging, implementing lessons learned, strengthening partnerships, but I'm wondering if there's any thought of including media meteorologists into the assessment process. Because you talk about lessons learned and strengthening partnerships. It seems like including the Sandy assessment, it didn't seem like there was much television, media, or meteorologist input.
Good point. When we put the assessment teams together in the office, the AQUIS office that I'm in, my goal, we can't, I find that to be one of the more challenging things when you get the composition of the team. You can't have the team so broad that it almost gets paralyzed because it's too big, but you want to include the people that you need in it. And not saying that we couldn't have used different people, but your point's well taken. What we're trying to do now for the assessments that are coming out is we're trying to go to different parts of the agencies in different parts of the public sector to bring people in to assist with these assessments. We have to have a federal person leading the assessment, but we can certainly have people come in. What we've done now that we haven't done so much in the past before, and I think it's another good step, is bringing social scientists in. On the plane right out here, I went ahead and I had the final draft of the Oklahoma tornadoes from May, and there's an entire section from a social scientist perspective, and it was pretty fascinating on it to see a different viewpoint. But yeah, I agree with you on future assessments. I'd like to see us be able to spread out and bring different talent and skill sets in to give us a different perspective on how we go. Okay.
Hi, Chris. This is Jennifer Gavina from WPSD in Paducah, Kentucky, and we are a very southern extent of this outbreak. And I want to get back to more of the social impact and social media and the involvement of social media in preparedness, taking shelter, because I feel like it's become a very double-edged sword.
Yeah.
we found out at NWA Birmingham, you know, some of the results from the surveys of people is that they wanted a second source, a second confirmation, usually wanting a visual of the tornado before they take cover. And I'm sure that's happening everywhere. Because in this day and age, we can go out and take a quick video or take a picture and send it all over the place. But then you also are starting to see videos of people who are waiting until the tornado is literally going to destroy their home, an EF4 or an EF5, and they're screaming because they're barely making it to shelter. And I wonder how we educate people when the media itself is also very responsible for some of that video. How do we communicate to our viewers that you don't need to see it to go take cover? One of the people that died in the Brookport tornado in some of the National Weather Service surveying was severed in half because she wanted to see the tornado outside. She and her neighbor were outside, and the lady she was with who told the story said, she's like, I just can't stay out here anymore. I'm scared to death. She took cover, while the other one, well, I want to see it. And that's what happened. And it's, you know, and they lived in mobile homes too. So it was like, I don't know how we reach people around social media now that it's not really that important to give us pictures of the tornado, or it's really not that exciting when people are dying doing it.
That's a good point, Jennifer. And you know, everybody wants to see their snapshot on national news with their credit at the bottom for taking the photo. Nothing worthwhile is going to happen immediately. And if you look at the difference from the generation currently, the past generation had none of that information. Now it's almost like a fire hose of information to decide what they need to do. Just like the guy in Long Island wanted to go out and get a pizza, and everybody else told him no. I think in time, and again, I'm not a social scientist, I don't pretend to be one, but I'm seeing this more and more, whereas we reach out in all these efforts to educate the public for what all you do on your outreach, when you talk about it on the air, when things like the Brickyard 400 and 1.2 million people. You know, Jennifer, if I get one person, I hope the one person who was sitting at the Brickyard 400 and now 1.2 million people maybe had the wherewithal, then after that, maybe they got something, and in November 17th Upper Midwest outbreak, maybe they did something that helped save them or their family. But I think it's going to continually take efforts like that, and from folks like you and everybody in the room, to tell them that, you know, we don't really want to see these crazy videos of you standing out there with tree limbs flying past your head. We want you to take cover. But I'm going to also, I'll put this back to you because this is something that we're studying now too. And I think there's going to come a point where, like I said earlier in my presentation, it's great. And we used to think 20 years ago, if you could tack another minute of warning time on, well, you did a great job. But I think we're almost coming to the point, how much warning is too much? And some people will see it and they'll be tapping their foot and checking their watch, and if it hasn't come yet, they may think that the risk is over. I don't have that answer now, but I think one of the things that we're working on as part of this Weather Ready Nation, the facets that I was talking about, probabilities, I think as we get a new generation that now starts seeing that, they're going to have better confirmation. Like you said, everybody's going to want to have confirmation from somebody before they take the shelter, unfortunately. But I think as we start the next generation of warnings, and that's going to be a part of it, hopefully, they're going to have a better awareness of what the threat is and take appropriate actions. But yeah, it's definitely something we have to look at.
And on a positive to the Weather Ready Nation, the impact-based warnings, Paducah area is part of that. And we are seeing that it's working.
Good.
In this same case, because you were able to, or the National Weather Service in Paducah was able to put in there catastrophic, because we've already seen the tornado on the ground. It's confirmed. Spotters have been tracking it. We then, the meteorologist team, we were able to put on the screen, tornado confirmed, take shelter now, in huge letters. And we got a lot of feedback from people saying that they got to shelter in time because of that. But it was because of those impact-based warnings. It didn't just say radar indicated or, you know.
That's good feedback to have, and we're trying to collect as much of that as we can. Sometimes it's difficult to get that feedback gathered in, but that's why we do presentations like this, to get that. Thanks for sharing that with me.
Chris, I'm Jennifer Broom from Fox 31, just right down the road in Denver. I want to know, what is the makeup? You're talking about the social scientists that you have analyzing. What is the makeup of that? Are you including a lot of social media experts? Are you including younger generations? Because obviously, I mean, a lot of us are highly fluent on social media. I mean, I know here it's tremendous for us, from the wildfires to the flooding to even avalanche danger. I mean, it's critical. Even the ski resorts putting out, you know, their snow total pictures and that sort of thing. So I kind of would like to know what's the makeup to help the National Weather Service catch up social media-wise to really be that forefront of alerting, you know, social media-wise too.
Well, you know, Jennifer, that again, good question on this. For National Weather Service, for the younger generation forecasters coming, I'm not saying for the old folks here, but for the younger generation, it's second nature on social media of how to communicate that. What we're developing now through a communication shop at the Weather Service headquarters is we're developing training now for the field. It's not enough to just bring that in from the outside. We want to train them. There's that word consistent again, how to consistently get a message across. So whether you're in Denver, whether you're in Paducah, you're going to get the same type of a message on social media on what to expect. And we have to provide training on that. We're having our warning coordination meteorologists, each of our 122 offices has a WCM that specializes in that. We're going to provide special training on site, face-to-face, to everybody to take back to their offices. And we're developing a social media policy for the agency on how we go about providing this. So we hear you, and we're catching up a little bit on it because social media it's gone so fast and it's grown so fast. But that's how we're attacking it now and trying to do it better.
With that training, will you allow some of us as broadcast meteorologists to come in and sit with?
We're going to hope that you come in and sit with us. So we're looking for the support.
Paul Goodlow, the Weather Channel.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Chris. As Dale mentioned before, we name storms now. We're in the second season of doing that for winter storms. What is the National Weather Service's opinion on that? Also, it's a great tool with social media is you hashtag Nemo or Hercules, and people can know what storm you're talking about.
For right now, we glad you guys are experimenting with it. For right now, we're not going to go into that. For the Weather Service, we're not going to start that. We're anxious to see what lessons learned you have and come back. It sounds like you're having some positive experience with it. So we'll be anxious to hear as you continue to go through the winter seasons what you have.
So I know in Europe, some of those Weather Service offices for whatever countries, they name their storms. So has there been a lot of conversation with the National Weather Service about really doing this? Because, you know, there is no, I guess, standardized names, because storms that affect the U.S. eventually cross the Atlantic, and then they're named something differently in Western Europe.
I have not been in touch with any of the international activities on that. We have been looking at some of the other countries, how they work. I had the previous slide on the winter warning hazards and hazard simplifications. Whoop, battery's running low, Dave. Danger, danger. On how they actually deal with winter weather warnings and warnings of any nature, and they actually go with a color code. That's something we're looking at too. So I think for us now, we do want to look at how our international partners are working with some of the systems, and there's going to be some lessons learned. So not to say that we have all the ideas here in the U.S. I want to see what other countries are doing too.
And we have one more question before we break. So online audience, you're getting a little bit of a bonus here. We are going to take a break in just a minute. Cindy?
Hi, Cindy Presser from KSDK TV in St. Louis. Hi. I think this is just feedback. I think the best thing the National Weather Service has come out with in years is National Weather Service Chat.
Okay.
We get so much information off of that during severe weather. That alone has helped us more than anything, I think, over the last 5-10 years.
Good. And that's, for those of you that don't know, the chat is something that we run internally between the Office of the Emergency Managers and the media. And we've had so many great comments on chat. And there's one TV meteorologist I used to work with back in my days in the field, that they would have it open, the computer open, they would be live on air, and they would see the chat coming in, 1-inch hail in Dormont, and they'd spell it out to real time. And that's great. I love that dynamic interaction.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, great. That's good to hear. Thank you for that feedback.
Well, thank everybody for all those great questions. Chris, thank you once again, and we really appreciate you joining us here at the Weather and Climate Summit.
My pleasure.
And also what we'll do, coming up next, we're going to take about a 15-minute break. Coming up next, we'll have Russ Schneider, who is the director of the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Before we leave you for the break and a couple of videos, we are going to run a video for your online, for the online viewers. What does a watch mean? Which is a video produced by SPC, and then we'll continue on with another video after that. But take a look outside right now, live in Breckenridge. We do have snow falling, and I'm not sure what the temperature is outside. Does anybody? It's definitely cold. What is it? 16? 60. Miami wishes it was 60 degrees. So we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thank you all for joining us for this great first session. Chris, thanks again, and we'll be back very shortly with Russ Schneider. So we'll be back soon. Stay with us. Chris, thanks very much.